I will be blunt and actually ask a first question to our British guests here. What do you think is the most important thing that you've been doing in your organization to support companies? And I'm also curious about how do you think the life science strategy has it helped you in what you're doing? Has it strengthened it? Has it changed the way that you work or stuff like that? Should we start with Anna?
Okay, so I think... Oh, there you go. Can you hear me? Yes. I think the most important thing we do in Health Enterprise East with this agenda is to help companies access clinical opinions, and we have a wide-ranging database of clinical contacts in the UK who are expert, and we put people in touch with them. We can do observational research. We can do lots of things that support fact-finding and opinion gathering and really understanding how stakeholders are going to perceive your idea, because sometimes when you actually go to stakeholders, you get a slightly different reaction to what you were expecting. Yeah. And the earlier you do that work and the more iterations you do of it, the better, really. So that's a major thing that we do as a company. In terms of the impact of the life sciences strategy, we're involved in lots of areas of that. We work with increasingly what are called academic health science networks across the country. Obviously, we work a lot with our Cambridge one, but we're also working with much wider ones now. And something that I'm particularly involved in, which is not a British idea, it's an American idea, we nicked it from the States, is something called the Small Business Research Initiative. And this is a program which kind of feeds into the lovely slide we saw about the value gap and how you get through that second phase of development. It's a series of competitions. At the moment, it's running 3 times a year. There's a theme. Companies are asked to submit. And if they are successful in their bid, they get some funding. So they get 6 months funding of £100,000. That's phase 1. That's kind of proof of concept type phase. And then they have to bid again. If they're successful, they get a year's funding of £1 million. And then we're sort of getting to the point where people are starting to get to phase 3. That's slightly uncharted territory yet, because obviously it takes time. So I'm working at the moment with companies working in the field of mental health, cancer, research tools. There's also lots going on about diabetes and cardiovascular. We've got new competitions out at the moment which include brain injury, imaging, lots of different things. And so that model is a very practical application of the national strategy because it's being funded directly by the UK Treasury in conjunction with the UK Department of Health. And that is really trying to get some investment out to small companies in ways that are useful for the UK health system, so it's not totally scattergun, and support them through the growth stage. And what companies have found, we're just doing an evaluation at the moment, that process has helped them attract outside investment. Investors have seen it as a sort of badge of quality. You know, if the UK government's prepared to put some money into this small company, then I might do the same. So that's an interesting model. Yeah, that's very nice. Ravi?
Okay.
Can you make it short?
Can I make it short? and can I follow that? Oh, basically, I was going to say everything that was said here. Just in short, really, in terms of life sciences, I mean, this stretches back probably a number of years, 10, 15 years, in terms of the UK government putting money into the system. And the NIHR started life in 2006. So it's slowly built up. So there's lots of infrastructure in place. All I'll say is, I mean, how we've helped, I mean, I've certainly linked a number of companies from Sweden now to infrastructure in the UK. And there's so much more that we can do. There's little things, small things, from just a simple question that might need to be answered, or you might have a specific question. We can put that to investigators. That's not a problem. It's easy, fairly easy. Or it might be a bigger thing in terms of putting a project together, a study together, in terms of getting an evaluation done or getting a multi-center study done. So there's a range of things that we can help with. And that fits very well into the life sciences agenda that the government has put together. It's all about the health of the nation, and it's all about creating wealth for the nation as well. So NIHR fits bang.
So you were sort of happy when it came because it was right in the line what you were already doing.
Yes, very much so.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Well, again, I agree with both of the previous sets of comments. But perhaps what I'll concentrate on is what I think NICE is most importantly that NICE has done and is doing, to support medtech companies. And I think really the most important thing of all is setting up our medtech programs. And not just setting them up, but the way they were set up. Because one thing I didn't have a chance to talk about in my 12 minutes earlier was that the way topics get into the NICE programs for both medical devices and diagnostics is through notification. And that notification can come, and mainly does come, from manufacturers. So we actually deliberately set up a system that really puts the industry in the driving seat. So there's a very, very clear pathway for the medtech industry to tell NICE about innovations that it thinks are really important and can benefit the healthcare system or patients. And then there's a whole a fully defined process that goes all the way from that to sort of national level guidance, and as I mentioned earlier, guidance that a lot of other countries also look at. So I think that's a really important contribution that NICE has made to the medical sort of technologies, and like the other speakers, we're very much agreed with the health and wealth agenda. Obviously, when something's at NICE for formal evaluation, it's got to be entirely subjective and evidence-based, and with zero conflicts of interest and things. But I think we're all basically want the same. I think we all want good, affordable technologies to benefit patients. So in that sense, I think we're actually more of a partner than people sometimes realise. Just very quickly, because I know I'm going on too long now. I think the other thing that we're increasingly doing is making sure that the sort of activities that we're doing and Anne and Ravi are doing are sort of joined up. And I think we liaise a lot, making sure that sort of the sort of methodology that NICE uses and will apply is sort of embedded in the early advice, whether it comes from sort of NICE scientific advice or through the sort of diagnostic evidence collaboratives that Ravi was talking about in his presentation.
Okay, thank you. So Chris, you're a little bit, so what do you say? Is it anything? Has the strategy helped you in your way of procurement?
Okay.
I think you just talked to it.
Yeah. I mean, obviously we recognise as an acute provider that we cannot continue doing what we do today. We've seen the pressures on the NHS, and as an acute provider we're feeling that, so we need to look at the way we do things differently. I think from a procurement point of view, certainly what we've aimed to do and what we are doing is raising the profile of procurement. We're certainly not a back office operation anymore. We want to engage with suppliers. We actually want to be part of the gateway of innovation into the hospital rather than a barrier to innovation. So we're now part of the C-suite, if you like. We've got a voice on the board, so we're actually an enabler for change. So my request to suppliers, to SMEs, etc., is please engage not only with clinicians at an early stage, but engage with the commercial and procurement family within the hospitals and health environments, because ultimately we want as much change as you want change.
Yeah, that's reassuring. I will ask my Swedish friends here. So, are you jealous about the British people, or are we better, or what do you say, Susanne? Can we learn something, or but you're doing a good job?
Yeah, are we jealous? Yeah, I'm impressed about the common effort that you in UK have done. So it's a very, very clear signals from the government, and we are a bit scattered, I think, between different agencies in Sweden. I would like to have a more common goal there. But maybe we are struggling against that goal. And I think you are a good example of how we can work, actually. So, yes.
Magnus?
No, I want to echo that. I think it's amazing to see how the government in UK have gone from everything from tax incentives to pure resources and made it in a very concerted way. And I think that's an area where I think Sweden needs to gear up. So that's a plea to the government, I would say. The other area I think is important is that we are a fairly small community here. I mean, there live more people in your triangle than we have in the whole of Scandinavia, basically. So I think it's important that we can look into not only Gothenburg and not only Sweden, but also Norway and Denmark, and try to gather that expertise and collaborate in a more and different way than we do today. Because if you look on Scandinavia as a community in its whole, it's quite impressive if you look on what actually comes out of there when it comes to science. And if we become better in assembling that competence and work together, I think we would step up, not just one step, but many.
Kai, do you have any?
No, I agree. Everyone needs inspiration, so it's good for us. And I think it's a clear understanding for us that it's national collaboration that's the model for the future. And I think one thing that we will also like to see is the possibility to also have a national collaboration from sort of IT perspective. It's very important for all our medical records, etc., to be a valuable asset for the researchers. And I think that's absolutely a national focus, so that needs to be in place for the future. When we combine information with biobanks, etc., that's where we can really argue that we can have a platform that would be strengthen the opportunity to work with entrepreneurs and innovation in the future.
Yeah. Okay, I will shut up and let the audience ask some questions if you have any. Anybody? Push the button, don't forget.
Got it. So in the United States, one of the things that we've learned with early stage companies in healthcare is oftentimes when we're trying to do deals, we discovered the hard way that sometimes you had to have the heads of IT present for deals that had nothing to do with IT, because they always stopped things that they were worried about integrating into the hospital systems. And so, little by little, we've learned these sorts of tricks. But the reason I bring that up is it's a general question to everybody in both Swedish and the English side is, what parties are not necessarily present at the table that need to be still in order to facilitate these sorts of transactions and these sorts of innovations? Is everybody at the table now? Is IT at the table? Or is there still pieces you think are missing or people that you need to integrate before this thing will become easier to do?
Anybody wants to start? Yeah, Ravi.
Okay. From our perspective and a research perspective, I think you're right. IT is sometimes still a barrier, particularly when we are trying to either install new innovative technologies into NHS trusts and things. We've had those issues. But the way around that we've found is that we've got heads of R&D who reside within our NHS trusts. They have a fair amount of power to actually get IT off their backsides and do something. So that's one way of doing it. So we've tried to leverage that. But I think you're right. There are different stakeholders that we need to engage at an earlier stage in discussions. And that's what we've tried to do in terms of looking at the innovation pathway and mapping out who the stakeholders are so that decisions need to be made. And rightly so, like we were talking about the procurement side, they need to be at the table early on. Yeah, and it's very important. And when we look at the pathway, we're talking about the whole pathway. Identifying the gaps potentially and who's involved is important at an early stage. So taking IT is one side. The other side is, we mentioned procurement commissioners. Again, very important in the UK from our perspective when we're looking at medical technologies, because they're looking at it more from a sort of a higher level in terms of who commissions what services and technologies. So we're trying to get those guys on board as well. It doesn't happen overnight, and that you have different people who have different agendas, and you need to bring them together.
Yeah, not specifically on IT, but I think relevant to the question. In NICE, I think I mentioned earlier that we have a health technology adoption program, and what they do is when NICE has issued guidance, they actually do sort of detailed adoption projects in collaboration with some early adopters within the health system, and just work through all of the sort of practical barriers to implementation that come up. And I'm sure they must have encountered IT-related barriers before as part of that. So IT barriers as well as any other barriers would be sort of part of those projects, and the output would be some sort of advice to people in the health system on how to actually go about implementing the technology.
And likewise, I would echo the sentiments. I think it differs from organisation to organisation, and we've certainly encountered that in the past IT have been a barrier as opposed to an enabler. To overcome that, more recently, we've actually introduced IT are now part of the finance family, so they don't stand alone as IT and informatics actually report to the FD, as I report to the FD. So that's been a recent change, and I'm seeing that model reoccurring now throughout the NHS. So I think hopefully that, by bringing us together with the same objectives, will address some of those issues.
Kai, you want to say something about Sweden?
The fact that we're actually talking from a European standpoint, I think what will be our development next step is probably that we join together, because it's a European market that we're talking about. So I think we need to understand how to collaborate between the countries, and that's something that's not in place today.
I will have one more question from the audience before we wrap up and everybody's hungry. Yes, please. Push the button so we hear you.
So now when Scotland are leaving as a separate entity, so we will fill the gap.
Okay, so that will end up, we will all have very important elections in front of us, both in Sweden and in the UK, that will certainly matter for the things that we have been discussing today. And I will thank you all on the behalf of Sahlgrenska Science Park, and I think we give them all a big hand.